go. Got a nice Disney top on today because Shanghai Disneyland is now open. Good morning, everyone. As you can see, that's where my head is at. Not in Whitechapel, it's in Shanghai Disney. Oh, there's been a tweet from Plymouth Argyle. Oh, it's not that interesting. So I am gonna get going. I know I've only been live kind of for a minute and a half, and I am. Oh, I'm dead on time. I was about a minute or so early coming live. I am going to kind of start getting on with this for you. Just as a quick reminder, Year 10, then please, that if you haven't sent me your mock already, I do need it so that I can mark it and send it back to you. Obviously, now the Prime Minister announced last night about schooling. There clearly will be an opportunity before the end of the school year that you'll be able to come in. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how that's going to work. We will find out more as kind of the days and the weeks go on. So if you ask me, I am going to be honest and say I don't know. So that's the reality of it. You will see me before I leave, and I will have you in a nice place before I leave. But what that looks like in terms of our interaction before July, in terms of in person or whether it's online, I don't know. I know the Prime Minister said last night, if you watched it, that you would have some sort of link. We don't know what that looks like yet. So I would just say hold tight, and as soon as we know, we will let you know. We're not going to keep you, we won't keep you in the dark. So we've been looking at Elizabeth, and we did a mock last week, which you have until the end of the day to get into me today, please. Hope you should have kind of done that by now. You did have a week last week to do that, and it's only 3 questions. So we're going to start looking at Whitechapel now. And this is quite a fun one, and I am a little bit gutted that I'm not physically teaching you in my weird way. Hello. And we have 2 sections to our crime and punishment course because we are now on the final course before you go into your exams and revision and stuff. So we are going to look at Whitechapel. Now, you have your own section of Whitechapel. Really, we're going to have to keep doing this. Brilliant. We have 2 sections to our course. So I started to watch the videos, but I got confused. What on this? Leon, on this one, on this slide. Right, so did you look at this sheet first? Because you need to do this sheet before you look at the videos. And that's what I'm going to go over now. I'm going to carry on. So you've got 2 sections, Whitechapel and crime and punishment. You have 3 questions on Whitechapel. You have a describe 2 features, which we have done in Elizabeth. You then have a pluck question, which you did in Germany, which I know you all love. And then you have a stupid question at the bottom, which is about an inquiry, which we will look at together at some later point. So we're going to start looking at Whitechapel today. Now, I've set you what we are doing with all Year 10s. So Mrs. Goy's Year 10s are doing it. I believe Mrs. Moore's Year 10s are doing it, Mr. Ania's. And I'm following what Mrs. Goy has set because it's fantastic. It's a really good way to get you introduced to the Whitechapel. So let's start. Things that you should know then before we get started is Whitechapel is in the East End. So get out of my pub, East Enders sort of thing. That's where you need to be thinking about where Whitechapel is. this is where, for the few of you that came on the trip in last year and then this year as well, that's why we went in Whitechapel. It is in the East End of London. So like I said, think Peggy Mitchell, all of that jazz. East End of London. Get out of my pub. Let's bring it a bit closer so you can see it, hopefully. Let's bring it a bit closer, away from me, so you can actually see the board. There we go. Yes, we're going to be looking at Jack the Ripper, Leon. Now, Whitechapel was made up of a lot of dark, narrow streets, okay? They were very maze-like. You had lots of alleyways. You had, hello, Fletcher. Every time I'm teaching, you cannot bear to be without me, dog, can you? Sorry, do apologise. Yes, Leon, perfect. They were like slums. They were dark. They were narrow. They were maze-like alleyways. They were very, very poor. It was a lot of poverty. Okay, so when you've got poverty, you do have a lot of crime. So there were a lot of beggars, a lot of prostitutes, criminals, people that were alcoholics. Okay, so it wasn't a particularly nice place to live. In 1873, you're going to love this, there was a Great Depression. Which is ironic considering our Germany course. And this meant a lot of people were unemployed, very similar to the 1932 depression. I say 1932 depression, 1929 to 32 depression. It was a lot of unemployment, a lot of poverty, lots of low wages. People were very, very vulnerable. Now, making up in Whitechapel, because it was such a poor area, it made housing quite cheap. It made places quite cheap to live. So there was a lot of immigration. Now, the immigration, it came from Ireland, from Eastern Europe, mainly Russia, and people were able to find cheap living, like cheap living costs, and they were able to get quite close work at the docks. As Leon rightly said, they were slums. This is quite hard to write on over here. Yeah, slums, poor living conditions, lots of pollution, yeah. And crime rates were extremely high. This is only then made worse in 1888 with our friend Jack the Ripper. His murders are done in Whitechapel, and they are notorious because he was never caught. Now, it highlighted, these murders, the ineffective policing. So it shows that where you were, if you were in a poor area, you didn't get as good of policing as potentially a rich area. And it was done by somewhere called the H Division of the Metropolitan Police. Now, these are all things that we will go into a bit more detail. But that being said, it's nice to have a little bit of background, a little bit of context when we move into our introduction of Whitechapel. So, let's get rid of this. My board. That was a good purchase, but the rubber's really ineffective. My pens are not very good, but never mind. We do what we can do. We do what we can do. Right. So let's look at the housing situation in Whitechapel. Let's write this down for you. So, housing in Whitechapel. Now, this is where, particularly sunny, you will benefit from this because you came on the trip. Beth came on the trip. I'm trying to think who else came on the trip. Anyone that went on the London trip, you will have seen what housing was like firsthand. Okay. Now, houses in, whoever's using Leon's name, can we please stop? I want this to be sensible. You guys are the most critical. Come on. You might think not being at school's a right laugh, but you will then be blaming people when you don't get the grades. So stop messing about in the comments and actually listen. Come on. You can do this. You're better than this. So houses were organised in Whitechapel into something called a rookery. Okay. Let's get this there. It's just like the bird. A rookery. Now, a rookery is effectively an area of slums. Now, houses in there were overcrowded, they were filthy, they were unsanitary, they had cheap rents but poor conditions, usually in here, okay? That's it, I'm not sat in the way. So these places, oh, Lord. These places were made up a lot of the housing in Whitechapel. Now, in these rookeries, you have something called a lodging house. Now, these are the main place that we will be looking at in terms of, like, with Jack the Ripper in his case. So this is where the poorest people would live. And the reason the poorest people would live here is because it was called something called a doss house. Now, why was it called a doss house? Is because you would pay 4p for a night, or 8 hours, really, for somewhere to sleep, and then you would go out and find work. So they were really, really poorly kept. There were particularly well-known lodging houses that were on 8-hour shifts, meaning they could get 3 lots of people in their lodging house. So obviously night workers would be sleeping through the day, that kind of thing. Yes, Whitechapel is in London, we've established that. So with these doss houses, these beds, some of them were coffins, all right? And I'm not kidding with that. Some were actual boxes of coffins that they would use for beds. Now, these beds were not changed. They were not kept sanitary. They were literally one in, one out. You don't get a new set of sheets or anything. So in a hotel, if you've ever stayed in a hotel, if you go in a room, someone else will have stayed there before you, but the housekeeper will have been in and changed the sheets, cleaned the room, and made it good as new, as if no one had ever been there. When you then go and stay in a hotel for multiple days, you don't get to have new sheets every day unless you ask for it. You use the same lot of sheets. Now, if you are there for a long period of time, like weeks or months on end in a hotel, they do change your sheets every week. You should do that at home, really. But in these lodging houses, they didn't really care about that. It was more about getting more people in the front door. So if that meant you had 1 8-hour shift, you shove someone out and you've got 5 minutes to turn the room around. Excuse me. You've got 5 minutes to turn the room around. You ain't going to change all the beds, the sheets on the beds when there was potentially 30 people in a room. Not going to happen. So that did mean that when you were in a DOS house, now if someone before you had thrown up in the bed or been sick in the bed, that's the same, had been wet the bed or had nits or had some sort of disease, you would then catch it. So if they'd had any blood or anything, it would be on the sheets and you would just have to deal with it. It was potluck what bed you got to. Now, if you can afford the 4p for a DOS house bed, you could pay 2p and have a go at the rope. Now, that literally is a rope hung along a like a washing line, and you sleep on the rope, and then they would cut the rope to wake you up. So it was not nice. It was day-to-day living, hand to mouth. Basically what you earned then would earn you a bed. Let me move this down so you can actually see it. And my knee, I do apologise. So you got 4p a night, all right? Now, there was coronavirus in that time. Coronavirus is a collective name of viruses. The one that we are suffering from is COVID-19, but coronavirus is a collection of viruses, just so you know. Why are there so many Leons? I don't know, because people are being silly, Sunny, that's why. So we've established that they were cheap but poor conditions. It was the lodging houses were poor for people, DOS houses, 3 8-hour shifts, 4p a night. Now, there was an attempt to improve housing in Whitechapel. There was an attempt. They did try, but it didn't go very well. And one of the worst slum areas that you can use as a case study is Flower and Dean Street. Now, this street is no longer there. All the houses were actually demolished, but it was one of the worst areas for crime, for conditions. It was awful. If I move that there, you can see my foot, but you know, who cares? Now, when this Flower and Dean Street was knocked down, the government pitched an idea to different charities for them to create a new way of living, a new set of housing that was better conditions and a lot more sanitary. And they did this with the Peabody estate. Now, the Peabody estate was opened in 1881, and there were 287 separate flats in this estate. The flats were made out of brick. They had much better ventilation. They had unplastered walls that couldn't be infested with lice. They had shared bathrooms and kitchens, but the actual bedrooms were not shared. They were your own. But the only problem about this is the rent was too high. Okay, the rent was too high here because it was such improved conditions. It did mean that it was unobtainable for the residents of Whitechapel. They couldn't afford the rent. Ridiculous. You are year 10. You are not taking this seriously. Coronavirus may have affected year 11s with no exams, but you lot are taking. So the rent was far too high. This actually made overcrowding worse. because the slum of Flower and Dean Street had, yes, very poor conditions, was not good, was very unsanitary, but it still was allowed, or it's still allowed people to have. Oh my god. Okay. So it made overcrowding worse. Okay. Now, even though the conditions were bad in Flower and Dean Street, people still had somewhere to live. They were somewhere they could afford, somewhere they could have call their own. But the Peabody estate, because they were so much better and the rent was far too high, actually made overcrowding worse because people had to move into already cramped, cheaper rookeries elsewhere. All right. Let's carry on. Great, my fat arm is right in the shot. That's just what you want. Right. So we've got housing. We've done housing in Whitechapel. No, we've not finished. If you could not afford a doss house, and you couldn't afford to lay on the rope, you would then be potentially forced into a workhouse, which you will come on into a second. Well, what was work like then in Whitechapel? How did people work? How did people earn their living? Well, there was kind of three main ways that people earned their living: through sweatshops. Now that is where you've got like shoemaking, tailoring. What else have we got? Matchmaking, as in making matches, not like Cupid. So like actual matches. You've also got something called a tannery. Now a tannery is where you make leather. It is a disgusting process to make leather. Now you have a lot of dog poo to be put into leather to make it that tan colour. The hours were really long in these places, and the wages were low. Another way that they could make their what is going on? Oh, I don't know. Another way that they could make their living was through construction. Now, whether that was on the railway or the docks. So, Whitechapel is very, very close to. It's very, very close to the River Thames and the docks there. So, and also there's quite a big railway connection. Well done, Sonny. And what was different about this labourer type of work is that it was very, very unreliable. So you could turn up to the docks on a Monday and you'd get 12 hours of work, good pay, and it was, a really good day. But then you could turn up on Tuesday and there would only be 2 hours of work, and the pay was really low. And you could turn up on a Wednesday and there would be no work at all. So it was really unreliable, really unpredictable, really difficult. Okay, I'm working with the stream. The stream is the best I can do. So stop saying the stream's broken. I know I have very poor internet. That's because everybody in the world is on it. Get a grip. If you then couldn't get work, you couldn't go to a doss house, you were really kind of at the worst that you could be, you would then go to a workhouse. Okay. Now, a workhouse was for those people that couldn't afford lodging, for the night. And if it was also for people that were too young, too old, too unwell to get to work, and they would go to the workhouse. Now, the workhouse excuse me, was the last resort. That really needs to be key for you, okay? The workhouse was not a choice. It was the last resort. It was very strict in there. It kept families apart. Everyone wore a uniform. There was really harsh discipline. If you've ever seen Oliver, the film Oliver Twist, that's very like what a workhouse was. It was designed to be as horrible as possible. Okay. Now, what you would do if you were in a workhouse is if you would sleep and have a night's sleep, and then you would work that off the day after. Okay, so you would do something called like what's it called? Like in lieu, I suppose. No, it's not that. It's not called in lieu. What's it called? What's it called? Gone out of my brain. Can't think what it's called. You kind of pay it in debt. You're always sort of in debt, and it then became a vicious circle. Because what would happen is you would sleep for the night, you would then have to do a day's work in order to earn your bed for the previous night, which meant that you couldn't go out to work to get out of the workhouse, and it would then end up being this vicious circle of you would stay in the workhouse, work for your bed the night before, stay in the workhouse, work in your bed for the night before, and it was then you would never end up leaving. Oh, for goodness sake. Now, the sort of work that they would do, the kind of in the casual ward. Can you see that? Yeah. So this is where people could come and earn a day's wage as a last resort. They had enough to get to a bed, but they needed somewhere to work. This was the people in poverty who would earn a bed for a night by doing dreadful hard labour. They would do something called oakum picking. Now, oakum picking is literally where you pick rope apart into the fibres of it, okay? And it's really hard on your fingers, on your nails, and you're hunched over like this. It's really quite awful. Or you'd have rock breaking. So you'd smash rocks into tiny, tiny pieces that they could then use on the railways. So I can see the rubbish that's going on in the comments. I think it's absolutely appalling. So on I do my lesson, I will not be having comments on because I think it's ridiculous. You are. Why would people need to pick the fibres from the rope? Okay, so Sonny, they would pick the fibres of the rope because it was really boring. It was hard work, and it was essential to making new ropes. So because it was such a poor area, they were quite resourceful in employers certainly were for keeping people poor, is they would reuse these ropes. Now they could get people in the workhouse who were absolutely desperate for work, for a bed, for a bed, to get this job of unpicking each fibre of the rope so that they could then make new rope. But it's tedious, so it's really boring, so you don't want to do it all the time. And it's hard labour because it actually cuts your hands to pieces, because when you start pulling the rope, you get like all the friction burns on it and eventually like burns your hands. So it was just a job that needed doing, that people didn't really want to do. And it then meant that you could get someone that had no other choice to do it, basically. What would be considered as good pay for some of these jobs? That's a good question. anything from like a couple of shillings a week, really, which is not very much now at all. What age did you start work? Really depended on how poor your family were. If you were really poor, it could be from age 3 or 4. In kind of like illegal circumstances, because you had there was a Child Act in that protected children from child labour, but it could be 3 or 4 going and picking things up from the ground and begging. So you could be 3 or 4, definitely. Home time when it got dark, so they would go when the sun had come up and go home when the sun had gone down. So what I want you to do is, using these boxes that you've got on the PowerPoint, as well as this video, I want you to create a mind map on all of the housing of Whitechapel, okay? So that can be, use as much images or colour as you want from the internet, I don't mind. And then highlight the keywords that are picked out in the bottom, as these are important. So these are the words that you need to make sure that you are including in your mind map, please, and highlight them, make them quite obvious to me. There are some useful clips that you can watch there that about accommodation, workhouses and workhouse jobs on the PowerPoint for you. Obviously, I've gone through them as well on this live lesson. And then finally, I would like you to have a go at the different questions that I've set them, please. So answer them in, what is a rookery? Describe the conditions in a rookery, please. Come on, connection. There we go. On a separate PowerPoint view, please submit your work via Teams or via email. You can do it in the chat function of Teams. You can do it in the assignment function. I don't mind. But your work from today and your mock needs to be in, please, by the end of the day. Right, that's me done. Thank you very much. For those that have been sending in the comments, more for you. Otherwise, I am on Teams if you need me. I am teaching at 12, so if you message me after 12, I will be teaching year 9. But then I'm in a meeting at 3, but otherwise, feel free to contact me. All right, bye.